everyone. Welcome to tonight's talk. Um, okay. All right, the voice is here. Hey guys, today's episode is I find an important one. I often get realizations upon my moment, and this one's a big one, I think. The title is How You Care for Life Suggests Your Life. And to care for something is not just to see the outcome of one's individual expression. You see, in this life, I find that there are two responsibilities. The more I take laps around the sun, the more I realize this. That we are here to take care of ourselves, and if we are wise, we will take care of our world where that sense of self is derived from. I've experienced great moments. I've been very blessed to experience great moments of bliss, great moments of existential bliss, where the experiencer within felt content with how existence was moving, or in some sense, the tune of suffering and inefficiency had not yet arrived. I'm telling you guys that the most important thing, especially for any person who's engaging metaphysical ideology, is to pay attention to how you see yourself, because how you see yourself is another way of how you will see others. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of a sort of shadow aspect of myself. You see, I am under the impression that the presence of the being is beyond the personality. So, on some level, I don't fear the shifts of the personality. This comes with a sort of it came with a sort of downside for me when I noticed that what I assume in others is not always the case, of course. But the way I'm saying it is that it's like having this impression that there isn't a, honestly, it's this: if you don't care about a certain sensitivity of life, you won't acknowledge it. If you don't have a certain data, a certain range of phenomena that you acknowledge, you won't have familiarity. And so many things which we don't have familiarity, we require patience in the first wave of the data. This is something I'm trying to be mindful of personally. You see, I find that every moment the person is awake, eventually waves of data will find them. That means I've had moments where I've just sat still, literally done nothing, and the world has moved. Literally, incidents, events have occurred that I noticed it wasn't per se had anything to do with my thinking, but in the absence of my thought, there was a subtler permission for life to happen. Now, this doesn't mean we have to be thoughtless creatures. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we should be so certain of our thoughts that we don't see anything else. You see, there are in philosophy two traps: the nihilistic trap and the enlightenment trap. The nihilistic trap is when, in some sense, you conclude emptiness to be the ultimatum, so you don't care for phenomena that much. I'm saying this in a sense of sometimes it's easier to be alone when you have never been with people. But sometimes when you're with people, it's not easier to be alone, because then manifestation brings with itself responsibility of the conscious view. So what I'm saying is that through the shift in my philosophical weather, you know, in my philosophical climate, as there's been a shift, I've come to notice that it's more important to care for life than in some sense to feel it is a certain way. I've started to notice how hollow um, the world we live in and the world that lives within us. That world that lives within us must care for the world. It must not think that the internal environment, if it thinks it's too superior to the external environment, it will not see the environment. But the external environment, if it thinks too seriously it's the external environment, it will inevitably see the internal environment. That means there's enough moments throughout a day for a person to be alone with the cosmos and also to experience not being alone with the cosmos. I kind of asked myself one night, why do I care so much about civilization? I asked myself in a kind of deep, profound way where I sat down to think how the question had even formulated in my mind. And I noticed that it's because of, believe it or not, the greatest collective action still has to have a point of selfish reasoning. That means the individual's choice considers the collective, yet it's the individual's choice. Pretty much it's like the veils of thought break as experience realizes the dimensions that stretch beyond it. Speaking is, I find, a very kind of slippery road. Anytime a person speaks, they are designing. They are designing the image of a sort of validity of at least where their attention is kind of driven in the moment. The main idea behind this talk is that it doesn't matter if you think you are spiritual, non spiritual, if you think you're attributeless, filled with attributes, if you think your intelligence is known or unknown. I have realized that to care for the human design is one of the greatest honors of this lifetime. That means it's like, if this is the fascinating thing, you're meant to learn for the first 1/4 of life from your own mind. Then the next, you have to begin seeing the rest, you know? And that's the fascinating thing. The fascinating thing that we can't live with each other because of our separate individual eyes, yet at the same time, we cannot live without each other because what is the point of our individual eyes but to find the collective? And what is the meaning of this? Honestly, sometimes I've noticed, I've kind of like you see a sort of sense of self that I have when I give these talks, that I'm playful, but there are certain moments where I'm also incredibly serious. And that seriousness, it's kind of like, literally when my attention goes to a thought that thinks my attention is not on it, the world of that thought stops. That means it's like sometimes I've had moments where just because of the intensity of my attention to a phenomena, the the first impression of the wave of the data kind of changed. So think of it this way: that as you're hearing me speak, with every word that I'm saying, an image is being evoked in your intelligence. Now, when this image is being evoked, it's one of those things where the overall structure changes, kind of like you adding drops of water to a cup, and the cup is getting closer and closer to the brim. When the cup reaches the brim and the water begins pouring out of the cup, that is beyond the language threshold. That is literally a human being who has realized the roots of intelligence beyond the ability of categorization. That means, what does man do when he acknowledges the limits of his dimension? Yet he confronts the unknown to, in some sense, either reverse the dimension, When you reach a dead end, you either leave or you take a different sort of transport, right? Because I'm telling you, as much as I speak about yoga, Vedanta, there are some mysteries that are sometimes hidden. That means sometimes when I look at Vedic literature, I definitely see certain moments, certain gaps that even if I tried, literally the kind of cultural framework, you see, it's like every culture, what makes it unique is that the actions align with certain emotions. For example, when you go to another culture, and let's say somebody says something humorous, or and let's say you enter, I'll give you an example. um, for example, right now I'm living in Canada. In Canada, it's very, very open, very easy. You can go anywhere. There's a sort of freedom of um, presence everywhere. But for example, in certain Eastern countries, like the country Iran I was born in, that country is one where, for example, I remember even as a kid when men entered the room and there were women there who didn't have scarves around their head. It's as if the guy would say, Ya Allah. The guy would make it kind of chant. He would shout something, and in doing so, it's as if the women knew there was a man coming in the house, so they would cover themselves. The culture acknowledges different behaviors. And it's very fascinating because eventually the value comes in the eye of the beholder. This is the true nature of existential independence. You see, because everything about our existence is dependent on our environment, dependent on many things. But how do we become independent as beings, not as doers, not as senses of doership? I'm not saying like you're the apprentice of a blacksmith and then you become an independent blacksmith of your own. I'm not saying it in that sense. I'm saying it in the sense of an independence, a sort of attainment of an unconditional state of being where the truth is like a universal law ever present. That means if you pay attention to the laws of nature, even scientific interpretations of the laws of nature, you're beginning to see eventually everybody's interpreting the same kind of artwork. So what I mean by that is that it's like one planet, bunch of creatures are making noises, and they're considering each noise that they make to be their own valid kind of domain of realness. To care for life means to care more than the life that for more than the life that you can see. Because honestly, if there isn't that care, action it doesn't come about. It's kind of like, why does a person have a need to speak if they don't even care for how the audience may hear it? Do you know? It's like there's a difference between whistling, whistling like subconsciously, and giving a talk consciously. I can tell you this, it's like my life started at a state where, playfully, this is actually nice, I can say it, where I felt I was alone, but not internally alone. My internal reality was kind of left fresh. I find because I remembered a memory of myself where it was prior to me learning language. Literally, I was so young. It's one of my earliest memories where I was just a moment of being. There was no conceptual framework, there was no context yet. It was just like I was the concept alone, an innate self definition of instantaneous expression. it's very difficult not to be hedonistic if one identifies as a material being where the inevitable route is emptiness. You see, if there's no point, then there's no need to draw lines. It's like you can't. 2019, we as human beings, I find, Mr. Within finds that you can't. Literally, we can't be complex. We are literally a young civilization that needs to learn its basic manners first. So literally, our imaginations can be said to be like ahead of our time. This is why it's much more easier to speak about the future than actually to bring it about. And it was the same for me. I was like, it's much easier to think about the future than to say it, or maybe to communicate visions on it. But let me tell you what gave me a strange freedom for my speech to open. Because you see, in my solitude, there is a freedom. There's a strange freedom. I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of like the privacy policy of the existential mind. It's alone with itself. This loneliness for people, because they want to fit it somewhere, they constantly react to it. But you won't believe how much your behavior will change just by the nature of your attention changing. That means I thought there were certain things that were just problems and errors of the self, of myself. And then I began to see, oh my God, how much of it is the voice of the environment, and how much of it is how the voice of the environment has told me to hold my past, my sense of relativity. You see, eventually in life, reference points form. These reference points are memories or experiences that make it to your long term memory. And there would be no need to discuss. I am telling you, there would be no point of me even talking about this stuff if there was not the presence of the unknown. It's the only time where man, I find, is okay with being wrong, when beyond that framework of knowledge there is other ways that the world is kept. And I remember, it's like I haven't finished these books, but I've kind of written notes. Sometimes when I can't, I have a huge concept, I just write it, I make it skeleton first, and then I kind of have to find time to sit down and write its flesh and skin and whatnot. I'm being, of course, poetic in a strange way. But what I'm saying is that it's like I gotta land the core concept and then kind of open it up, you know. I find the same way the human being rode a horse is actually in a similar rhythmic vibe. The personality works with the presence. So anytime life moves before you have articulated it, it will seem unknown, of course, but it will seem unknown with a hidden intelligence. Um, it is so complex. It is so complex because on some level, just the mind being something that is not material, it's as if the mind has something in common with emptiness. Like just check this out for a second, dear listener, that the person has a relationship with the objective phenomena, and a person has relationship with subjective phenomena, your ideas, your memories, your visualizations, whatever or however way your attention evokes phenomena, subtler phenomena. I find that without the objective realm, there is no foundation to the subjective. And those books I was writing were called The Pillars of Civilization, because in some sense reality is kept by hidden pillars. These hidden pillars man cannot comprehend, but this is why in some sense ethics and the stoic mindset of virtue was very important. That means we have to preserve certain things that we don't understand yet in the hope that they will be understood. This is why that we are still in the era of being true to ourselves, because truth is in a dualistic mode. That means I'm telling you, the greatest conclusion I find, this may be too bold of me to kind of say something like this, but I find the greatest conclusion that any seeker of the unknown will find is that now is the time for them to be whatever they are. There is no other time. Most people who are waiting for heaven, they are waiting for their freedom to come. They have not dared wonder if their freedom can be here now. But what is this freedom? Because when we really enter the world, and especially in regards to civilization, when one enters civilization, it's literally entering programs with so many unknown variables that it's like either the people will change or the program. But because the unknown variables are people, believe it or not, literally, if 8 billion people told themselves a different story, that would be the reality. So we have two issues here. One, what is the collective story? What is the great inspiration of civilization? What is that? Excuse me. What is that collective ethos kind of waiting to be found? So one issue is what is the story? The second issue is how can 8 billion people with different eyes see the same thing enough to contribute to build it? You see, and now is a time where it's as if um, this imagine this as a kind of version of Noah's Ark story, where when Noah went to people and told them that a storm is coming, imagine people believed him and they're like, all right, let's build a giant ship. And even the animals came and helped to build the giant ship somehow, you know? So it became one of those things where all living intelligence in the universal sector begins abiding by the presence of the moment. Because I don't feel knowledge um, written knowledge, spoken knowledge is not truly knowledge, to be honest. It's world play with precision. How you care for life is how you accept the moment. And how you accept the moment suggests the design of the meaning of both the objective and subjective phenomena. I find that one advantage I have is that when I consider dimensions, I consider again as like if you've listened to a lot of my talks, you probably are familiar with. I speak about the objective realm and the subjective realm. Now, this gives me an advantage because I can now separate the difference between data that comes to me and data that I originate. But if we had no consideration of the mind, no consideration of the subjective realm, of course, it's all mysteries of objective reality because we don't see anything more than objective reality. All mysteries will seem to be in the matter. This world is strange, and I feel I will roar as much as I can see of it. And I honestly feel, at least, that there is it's so fast, like it's literally one of my the biggest questions of my lifetime which I feel I innately have a sort of allegiance to an answer of, but it's whether multidimensionality came first or the singular. Because singular is very easy. It's so easy to say there was nothing, Big Bang, everything. Let the kids play outside in the yard. But the true conversation is that if reality was multidimensional, or in its causal as a causal factor, it would be impossible to locate. Do you know what that means? That means it's still nothing. Even though the Big Bang happened, it's still nothing for consciousness. So consciousness's purpose will get defined by the objective. Anytime a human being, a physical, objective, biological human being wonders, literally like wonders, okay, I'm on this rock in the middle of nowhere. Okay, I'm this unique genetical design of nature evolving. Okay, what now? That what now is as profound as realizing the word nowhere is also the two words now here. Nowhere is now here. Here, the here and now is nowhere. Because nowhere holds it all, because this is as much as we can see of where we are. So when the question changes, I find literally the warriors of humanity change their stance. Because here's the thing, you only fear when you feel outer reality has more freedom than you. Did you know this? This is why when two people, this is why the word jealousy exists. Jealousy is literally like somebody else has actualized the version of yourself that you wanted. But the attachment to the thought is the true source of the jealousy. That means, have you understood the value of your DNA? Have you understood the value of your eyes? You see, this is why I say on a rock in the middle of, on a pebble in a light beam, where 8 billion creatures are, everybody is a writer. Just write what you see. It will be a bestseller as history will go on. I am telling you. We are trying to escape reality. Like, check it out, guys. This is what I don't like about the entertainment sector. And this is actually what I dislike about pretty much the simulation theory as well. If you are alive once, why experience a simulation? And I believe language is a simulation. You literally simulate it. You know? If you're super still and silent, just like how your breathing comes more into your awareness and you start hearing your breathing, then you'll start hearing, how would I say it? You'll start hearing how your thoughts are being moved by the wind of the divine. I'm telling you, if there's a story to it, it is not truly divinity. That means on some level, this may be an intense statement, but I feel someone should say it. I feel religion, the message of the prophets cannot be seen as revelation. Because if it was revelation, the will of the creator will be lost to the book. Yet the creator is suggested as so unfathomable that it is within everything and everywhere and watching everything, even outside of everything. So it's like the creator is a field of intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not, our ancestors are not cavemen. They are not, in some sense, the bacteria at the surface of under the surface of the ocean who survived like a meteor explosion. Our ancestors are a field of intelligence beyond space and time. And believe it or not, there's a really nice ancient story about this. It's the story of the fish. And the story of the fish is that there's this school of fish, like not just a group of fish, like an actual school of fish. Like fish are going there to get degrees, just entertain the story, So a group of these fish, kind of like the Frankfurt School, are like wondering about the nature of reality, and they're wondering about the nature of truth, and they're pretty much wondering what God is. So imagine a fish, if we could imbue it with a playful personality, imagine now this fish is like, where's God? What is this God? And to them, as the story will unfold, God is actually the ocean, but they don't know, the fish don't know how to conceptualize. So here's the story. A group of fish find this older sage. They find this older fish, just still a fish that moved less than the others. They say, "Oh, wiser fish, tell us, what is God? We believe God is a bigger fish." And this is where the wiser fish says, God is not a fish. God is the ocean. The ocean is within us. Its currents move us. Without it, we cannot be alive. We cannot be intelligent. Do you see? And the younger fish are like, nah, man, it's probably a whale. Like, God is a whale. It's a bigger fish. God is like, it's like we have God, and then we have like Superman. We have Super God. So they feel it's like God is they're pretty much idol worshiping an image. That means you can say, believe it or not, idol worship is image worship. The older fish looks at the younger fish and tells them that the truth is simpler than the explanation they want. How do you explain how, like, imagine you were in the eyes of the wiser, older fish. How would you explain to the younger fish that it's the whole ocean? They are basking in it. So what that means is, I find religions at that time did not have the concept for a field of intelligence. So they could not explain it, so they had to personalize it and make the personality of man endless in its attribution. So what that means is, like, you also go see in the Zen tradition, there's a lot of paradox kind of thinking, Zen koans. Certain ideas that don't make sense, but they're full sentences. Like Alan Watts is famous for saying one. He says, it's like trying to bite your own teeth. It's like, and this one is another one. It's like, who were you before your parents were born? Right? These are Zen kind of, you can say, certain Zen koans that were there to kind of snap out the mind of the being from a conditional doership. That means, believe it or not, if we made life all about freedom, we would reach the extreme, and we would feel to not have freedom would be as new, would be a kind of new freedom, kind of like how the utopia doesn't work. And if there was not freedom, and let's say there was discipline, and honestly, discipline is good and it's necessary for human life, but too much of it and too much glorification of discipline is literally like, go worship the engine of a car. You're making the world into a machine. Too much repetition makes the world into a machine. Remember this. This is why I'm saying it's so important for the human being to attempt novelty throughout the day. That means when new things happen, go with it. But also be conscious and mindful, because your intelligence, hopefully in this talk I've been able to explain that the unconditional state of mind is where freedom and discipline are bowing to the presence of the being. You don't understand. Your presence is, the moment is the ocean. and everything in it is the fish. And so, what fallen in love with the wheel? And that's tragic and pretty boring, I find. You know, it's like it doesn't matter. Even if infinity, you experience infinity, I think after a while the person's going to get bored of infinity too. You know, how long can you go to the infinite and beyond? You know, like. So where does that lead us? It pretty much means the child whose mind is still conditional, who's dependent on phenomena. And it's not wrong to be dependent. I'm not telling people to become like armored knights without emotion. Like, you know? I'm simply saying that eventually you will run from ideology to ideology to ideology to ideology until realizing that the best thing you could have done in every moment was to see, to get, it's like, think of it this way. You paid for a ticket, imagine, to a concert. Now you go to that concert and who do you see on stage? Yourself. And that's the value of your life. It is literally your moment to watch. And we have to start learning to appreciate life as not just a body that is projecting a mind, but as a mind that is projecting the body. Because the mind is like the wind. You see, I find that they spoke about the world in ancient times being made of 5 elements actually, and some people considered only the 4, but in actuality there were 5. And what were they? Earth, air, fire, water. I'll explain these in a second, but I gotta explain ether, which is the 5th element. The 5th element, ether, was space. So in ancient times, space wasn't just emptiness, no meaning. It was an element as well. Now check this out. If the elements back in the day, imagine you were someone who, this was like the chemistry lesson of back in the day, okay? So imagine you got this chemistry lesson and now you began to see kind of, okay, if the elements that make up the world are these 5, it's kind of like my whole moment is these 5. And so I remember when I playfully kind of got introduced to these kind of this strangely more earlier vision of the elements of the world, I realized their elemental vision was sophisticated. It wasn't as sophisticated as the periodic table. And modern chemists, of course, look like aliens to those people who thought the world was like 5 elements. But but it's one of those things where it's just that it's not just the element of it, it's also the movement of the phenomena. So fire was a sort of transformation, a symbol of transformation, a symbol of purity, you know. Um, it used to be like this before, you know, somebody spoke about hell. Before Dante's Inferno, I remember reading that the concept of the image of hell and the image of sin. So I want you to think about it. It's as if like there's the Christian kind of Bible, and then there is like an Italian poet who writes this book called The Divine Comedy. And in it, he's very descriptive of different dimensions of suffering and joy. And of course, he goes on a journey, and the book is kind of like, I don't know, it may be, if you like horror movies, maybe you should read it, you know. But it's also unnecessary thoughts. It's like that's a book that I value as like, okay, it's an important book, but I don't recommend you should read it. You know, understand, like, go read the Wikipedia page on it, but don't read it. It was as if like the poet's influence throughout history. It's as if anything in a long enough timeline merit will infuse. For how long can nature resist itself? What that means is I consider my elemental existence literally, it's as if um, every atom of my being has decided to be this in a strange way. And so it's like certain elemental structure, kind of like the wave of an ocean, and then the wave returns. So really, death is for a character in a story. But if we're not characters in a story, in some sense, it is change. And how do you interpret change? Known is moving into the unknown, and the unknown is becoming known. That means I have this kind of very interesting argument about the kind. I'm speaking to atheists right now, and because I want to entertain the notion that the brain, before it dies, may suddenly, some people say, release certain chemicals that make it kind of hallucinate. So I feel any hallucination it has, in that moment, it's the brain's last stance. So it will make the known and the unknown the same before decomposing in regards to the hallucination. So what it means is that right now you are an embodied being and you feel your mind is more unknown. I feel what will happen after the elemental decomposition is that you will feel the mind. You will be more known as the mind, and you will see that the body is unknown. And this loops. Oh my God, this is like it's like this endless taking turns of being a collective being and a single being. Collective being, single being. You know, it's like the guy hugged the tree, but upon more closely examining nature, realized a lot of stuff's fucked up in nature. To the civilized mind, at least. You know, civilization can be said to be a straight line in nature. But when you go in nature, you don't see straight lines. And if you do, it doesn't have the 100% precision. So it's not a straight line. It's kind of like, imagine right now you had a piece of paper in front of you and you drew a line on it, a horizontal line. Now you can flip the paper or you can move your head, right? So I'm saying again, there is an internal adjustment that opens up more vision, or there's an external adjustment that opens up vision. And once a being finds enough contentment with their individual selfhood, then the universe kind of is like, okay, experience the rivers of being. For once you were a drop and now you are the ocean's return. The ocean is returning to itself, you know. When I look at nature, I cannot avoid cyclical influence. That's the cool thing about nature. It's following a program. You know, I had this very peculiar idea where I thought the planet is orbiting. And of course, in my poetic kind of universe, the planet is not only alive, but the whole universal sector is alive. That means if you ask me, can a universe have a soul? I'll tell you yes. And the reason I say yes so easily is because I want to break your expectation of the unknown. That's where true honor comes. And that's what the purpose of this talk, that you know, if we were perfect beings, we wouldn't be in an imperfect world. Therefore, the concept of enlightenment, if you take it as if it's like ultimate perfection, it will lead, of course, to the inconceivable, because the world seems imperfect. We are too obsessed with ourselves as a civilization. This is why we don't care to evolve the collective narrative. The collective narrative is like, think of it this way: you tell yourself a story, and that's you. It's like you live the story of you throughout the day. Now imagine civilization has a story for its overall, every human being. When I say civilization, I'm creating a definition of it. I mean, like, I find this is what it should mean. The influence, literally the sum total of all behaviors of all societies on this rock. Because we don't have time to, it's like, look, this is the hilarious thing. Like and then trying to, in some sense, enlighten the world that way. It doesn't work. That means there has to come transformation. That means the moment we realize we're attributeless beings, our attention drives our vision. So your attention is your greatest resource. Attention has always been the greatest resource. When I say thoughts live among us, ideologies are walking in the street, they're also walking in people's minds. Because possession is not just possession by some spooky thing. Possession is ideological possession. The person literally has put a box of belief over their head and they can't see anything. It's as if, of course, it's not wrong what they see. You know, of course, you can't go to the religious person and be like, you're a fool. You know, it's like any person you call a fool will get mad. You know, you have to see the limits of how much the belief system allows the perception to acknowledge. There are certain things that a person may see, but they may not say. And you know, I remember having a conversation with my father. My father uh, entertains the notion of past lives in a very deep and personal way. And it was a moment where my father was asking me if I believed in past lives. And it was a very, believe it or not, incredible moment. And I told my father that what I think I am right now is a very tiny percentage of what I am as completely. So what I mean is, once you get once you play enough with the individual life, you'll suddenly authentically wonder about the collective. And anything that enters the realm of exploration, only courage will help you. But that courage will come if there isn't a condition that becomes another voice of resistance. Because there's many voices of resistance. It's like, it was like the first time I picked up, like when I was young, I picked up the Rubik's Cube in Iran. I was like a young kid in Iran. And the Rubik's Cube was something where it's like, it was me and a group of my cousins and everybody was playing, you know, was with this, but nobody believed they could finish it. People would just play with it maybe for a couple minutes and let it go. And I remember the first time I got the Rubik's Cube, it was literally an hour. It was literally like, I felt the Rubik's Cube was taunting me. And I found that only through endurance, I reached a point where the solution wasn't the way I expected, you know? That means like, the Rubik's Cube wasn't something where I had an expectation. Literally, my mind was visualizing a way that I could see the end result. I could see the completed cube, but I could not see the way up the mountain. You see, I could see the top of the mountain, but I could not see the way up the mountain, right? And so, but I attempted. And it was this moment of endless endurance, because you can't attain mastery if you can't be a fool in front of yourself. Because the master has to know the mistakes of the fool. I'm not joking. Literally, you have to be aware of your blind spots when you drive. You know, that's foolishness, to be honest. Like, you weren't aware of a blind spot, and you know, foolishness echoes. I'm telling you, when you realize that the New Age community has got it all wrong. The New Age community, all those people who are entertaining metaphysical stories of truth, they've got it all wrong. If we want to understand the secrets of nature, we can't speak first. That's why meditation is silence, and stillness is, to be honest, the most convincing portal to the unknown. Incredible stillness and silence. You won't believe it, you know, until it actually, you experience it. That a moment, literally anything that is happening to you throughout the day, when reality gets, I pretty much think like life is like this. When you wake up, it's either controllable or uncontrollable. And when it's controllable, it functions, it flows. Literally, you can say the car engine is working properly. You know, I feel like I need to get a new car. But like, the car engine is working properly. Um, Sorry, guys, I had this thing on mute and I was just talking. Anyways, I'll just continue. Uh, sorry about that. I got to a point where I was kind of saying that you have to kind of close your eyes. Not have to, but I'm just suggesting like you can close your eyes and it becomes something where imagine just okay, entertain me for a second. Imagine you're a salesman going door to door. Hey Idris, I'm just gonna go with the flow of the talk, and then I'm gonna come to Discord after. So I'll post the links. Stay tuned. Anyways, rhythm. It's so key. It's the evolution of the intellect. That means it's kind of like a person and their beliefs looking at the world being more alive. I think that's why people are drawn towards happiness because they feel they are more alive as a being. And to be honest, we are such a self-obsessed species that it's just value. That means you won't believe how much the intelligence of people would change if the whole, like literally society, the civilization, literally governing power revalued the citizen. We think money, we think an object is still the greatest resource. It may be because society is designed that way, but the greatest resource is behind our eyes, not in front of it. That's our greatest resource, what we can extract from the unknown into the known, how the doors of the unconscious open. And so that metaphor I was saying, think like you're a salesman, kind of going door to door. You're closing your eyes and you're going to every memory, the door of every memory. And it's literally negotiating, communicating, sharing, and receiving from every experience. That means if you ask me right now if I think my memory is a file cabinet, I mean, sure, I could sit down and try to write it accurately, but after some point, the weather becomes intense. It's as if what I mean by that is that I understand that you gotta go, but I'll post the Discord thing in the next talks. I found something interesting. I'm still Not sure how I would go about it, but I thought of kind of bringing the Discord. I might make another channel where maybe we just put these I open it up to Discord and I pretty much record it. So on some level, it's like recording on the computer on one laptop and it's being heard from them. Sleepless nights of the bewildered mind. The Bodhidharma. Let's just get into this. Pretty much this Japanese Zen master who was in a deep state of samadhi is visited by someone who can't is restless, and the guy literally hasn't slept for many nights, and he comes to Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma is an intense character. Maybe I should paint a little bit about who he is. He literally was a patriarch of Buddhism to Japan. Idris, I'll answer your question. Um, yeah, I'll tell you this. It's literally just hold on. The thoughts orbiting. um, what was the point? Listen, the New Age. Oh, I got. I think it. I can't pinpoint it exactly, but I think where I was heading with it was that they haven't acknowledged the attributeless space where novelty can be anything, and they don't have to constantly seek it on a personal dimension. They have to realize that it's not about kind of like um, more important than the performance is how the stage is being built for the future generations, right? And it's so easy. It's like the same thing. Like somebody can live a life where they're just dwelling in subjective spiritual beliefs and kind of um, it's like literally being in the movies all the time. You can't play with the unknown too much. Even me personally, that when I was younger, of course, like I went through a phase where where I was wearing Tibetan Buddhist beads, and literally I had reached like I felt literally like my karma was pure, and I was just walking and just literally I didn't have I didn't have a karma because there was no character with a story in that moment. So it's like and I felt like I was like maybe in my past life I was a Tibetan Buddhist guy, like to that degree. I went into that kind of mindset, and it was necessary, of course. But it was like I'm telling you, it's one of those things where now I don't touch thought until it's necessary. What I mean by that is that um, some people think through the language structure being there first, and then. So, what that means is the rules are there first, then freedom of expression. But when it switches around and you realize you have freedom behind your eyes, that freedom behind your eyes completely changes the context of anything you see in front of your eyes. And I'm kind of realizing, okay, what's the point of our objective biological design? It can't just be everybody goes and meditates and maha samadhi is out of this physical reality. It's not that every person in the world has to just meditate. Meditation is a response to suffering. But in that attempt to respond to suffering, one has to break through the self they think they are in that moment. So it's the rawness of experience kind of happening, right? I can say that I've had moments where there has been objective change before I could even consciously interpret it, and that objective change was it's like it's very easy what you don't have an explanation for to give the unknown its power. But I'm telling you, eventually, it's like when you abide by your true nature, literally a sense, a version of yourself that is comfortable with the whole moment, that can trust the moment. When you can trust the moment, then that's when sort of truthfulness can be cultivated as a dynamic momentum. So you see, the issue with karma is that, you know how, of course, the modern poets say karma is a bitch, but excuse my language, but uh, it's because it's like the karmic result has to be for them an attitude shift, which is an internal acceptance of a certain way things are. The mystic requires to get the pilot of consciousness requires to get comfortable with movement and noise. Sorry, with movement and noise and stillness and silence. Both sides of the spectrum. When you get comfortable with both, then there is nothing. It's like it's literally like getting comfortable with these um, kind of, you can say, four states. I'm painting too complex of a picture. Literally, if I could explain what I find intuition and all these synchronicities are trying to do, is they're trying to make the person get accelerate in changing experiences by following their own wonder. It's kind of how Tolkien says, not all those who wander are lost. Yeah, yeah. I, Idris, I totally, I see a similar kind of view. But I'm telling you this, that I find when it reaches that point, like literally your last sentence, when you say, then consciousness realizes freedom from the phenomenal world, that's when, in that space, if you abide in that freedom, what's going to happen is literally the mind is not resisting. And because the mind is not resisting, I find nature moves you. So it's literally like you don't have a need to be a character in a story. So you're the unfoldment of the whole moment rather than a certain associating with a certain part of it. Um, yeah, yeah. The body's response is acceptance. The mind's response is continuity. The soul doesn't have a response. um, I agree, Idris. But the thing is that this is where anytime we get to try to reverse engineer where consciousness came from, even if it's an ancient tradition, it goes beyond the language threshold. And so I'm saying literally, when what happens beyond the language threshold is that the unknown, it's like the comfort changes, the experience changes. Idris, how do you perceive that you, like, what happens after the union with the highest being? Is it kind of like how raindrops just return to the ocean and then become raindrops and return to the ocean? Do you perceive it like that? Because I find the benefit cannot be for you because the sense of you is destroyed. And I feel if it's for all, you don't have an ego to even be an individual in society. I'm saying, yeah, I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly. Maybe like explain a bit. By the way, guys, if anybody's listening to this and they can't see the chat window, I'm responding to the chat window. Listen, Idris, I think it's like this. What happens in that union? If we want to get really esoteric, it's like there's some people who literally, there were some yogis, even known in Tibet, who, that when their meditation, they would reach a certain point where their energy literally was so like heated, like so beyond this world that it's literally their body, physical body, couldn't contain the expansion of their energetic will. Hmm. Yeah, the reflection in the mirror. Yeah. Of course, we're hypothesizing, but I know what you mean. The thing is that, at least I kind of brought this up in a science fiction thing I wrote. Yeah. The thing is, here's the thing. I I honestly feel that field of intelligence's reality doesn't think of the body the way we do. I think it's kind of like a part of us is both space and matter. So the space part is was never a thing to die, and the matter, of course, breaks. Yeah, thanks, Idris. Um, don't I wouldn't recommend, like, don't need to, don't buy any of them because I have this thing where I'm probably gonna like, um, I like intuitively put the pricing. But I could just explain them to you. That's easier. The poetry ones, I'm probably gonna make them all free. I don't know, but I feel you don't need to. Don't buy them. Unless, I don't know, maybe your intuition pulls you to them, and maybe you need to see those words. But like, aside from that, you know. All I find myself intuitively drawn to language, because language, if you don't respect it, it disturbs the mind. But if you respect language, it becomes an ally. Hmm. Wow, that's a I think I just took in. Idris, let me tell you something hilarious about cationic imprints. Okay, and guys, I'll get back to the talk, but let me just say this: this book, Cationic Imprints. it's if I told you how I wrote it, you're gonna laugh. I would go to sleep right in my bed, and my left hand would hold my phone. I kind of learned this from Salvador Dali, that Salvador Dali would put a spoon on his leg, and the spoon would fall in a bucket every time he got sleepy, and in a semi-conscious state, he was writing a book. And what I how I wrote cationic imprints honestly was I had a dream of a certain geometrical shape, which is the title on the cover of the book, or it should be there. And the book was written, and I was kind of in a semi-sleep state. Literally, I was in my room, the lights were off, I'm in my bed, and I'm just holding the phone. And I just kind of, it was a time where I was just, it's a lot about certain ways at that time my semi-conscious state perceived um, the extraterrestrial, the other, the invisible other, in regards to this extraterrestrial view. So that book is kind of like you can say it's about aliens, you know. All tools can be allies, yeah. If you know how to use it, it can definitely be an ally. But you know, the tools have to update too, even language, and that's the cool thing. I remember um, a good friend of mine, a good friend I had. You know, I'm not friends with him now, but a good friend of mine named Gabriel. He once told me it's as if communication was kind of like two different kinds of colors of gases. And when communication occurs, it's literally the colors get infused. What that means is literally by the nature of the experience occurring with different forces, it's the moment is resculpted, right? Kind of like how a bunch of people in the movie Mad Men were in the boardroom, you know, resculpting the value that they need to pay attention to or whatnot, right? But anyways, oh, I never finished the Buddy Harmon story. I think. So Idris, I'm not, um, I'm reading your comment. I kind of want to see like how deeply are you using the metaphor of the towel? Mm-hmm. Yep. I just read your last comment, Idris, and yeah, the phases, the different phases that a phenomenon goes through. Because you take it too seriously, you have to let go of the phenomenon you guys. So so I agree with what you said, Idris. kind of like how Lao Tzu said, the Tao is like, if I speak about the Tao, like that's not the Tao. That's like the first thing written in the Tao Te Ching, you know. And it is very true. I find that nature doesn't need an explanation to be, but it does per se need an explanation if it thinks it is a certain sense of a doer. I find enlightenment is like, what cool thing they could say. It's like it's being content with the light in your eyes. I mean, what else can there be? So, anyways, guys, I'm gonna continue with this Bodhidharma story to kind of wrap this talk up. This guy goes to Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma is in his meditation. Bodhidharma was a patriarch of Buddhism in Japan. I believe he was the fifth patriarch. And an emperor kind of came to an emperor. The emperor made a lot of Buddhist things, kind of like Buddhist statues, shared books and whatnot with the books of Buddhism, kind of spread the like built kind of infrastructure for Buddhism. And Bodhidharma came to the hall of this emperor, and this emperor is like, "Hey, Bodhidharma, tell me what's the merit? What's the merit in all these Buddhist temples I've made and Buddhist statues I've kind of put?" And Bodhidharma looks at this emperor and says, "It's all been foolishness. There's no merit." And he leaves, kind of disappointed and angry. And the king is like, "Whoa, whoa, I'm a king." The king is feeling insecure after the nudge. The king is like, "Whoa, what do you mean it's been foolishness?" And suddenly, after the Bodhidharma leaves, like the councilmen of the king come to him and they tell him it's not that there was no merit. There was no merit in the way you wanted it. Like you wanted it to have merit. It was unnatural. So Bodhidharma was like in another way of saying like, "What the fuck are you doing?" You know. So the behavior was the issue, but not the intent. Sometimes someone can have a pure intent, but the limits of the communication or just how the appearance of the moment occurs could be maybe in a certain way. But anyway, so Bodhidharma ends up leaving this palace and going outside one of the walls of the palace and kind of like his like staring at the wall, like the wall is inches away from his face, like the palace wall, and he goes into some samadhi. And I wondered why he did that, and I like at first I'm like, yo, this Bodhidharma is the most badass person, you know. He kind of like metaphor, like kind of like uh, dismissed the king with a slap. And came outside and meditated on the wall of like the thing, you know. And the reason is because I think when he wanted to be, he felt he was beyond material reality, so he didn't want to just be in the material. I feel like certain beings, once they become acquainted with the collective presence, it is easier. It's easier to be the ocean when a drop is in the ocean. It's much harder to be a drop. The individual consciousness is divine in the sense that it requires responsibility, which is the collective's kind of what the collective, I find, soul of the moment wants. You know, the power of Brahman whispers that way. So one night, this guy, you know, kind of, this person who's troubled comes to Bodhidharma. It's a foggy night, and Bodhidharma's in his meditation and whatnot, samadhi, and eventually Bodhidharma gets up. And when he gets up, this guy runs to Bodhidharma, kind of like a patient waiting outside of the doctor's door for like an hour or for weeks. I don't know how long the guy was waiting. But like, the person goes to Bodhidharma and says, "Bodhidharma, my mind is restless. You gotta help me." You know, like, he doesn't say that his mind is restless. He says, "You gotta help me. You gotta help me." He's kind of like, he's in this panic, in this problem. Bodhiyama doesn't acknowledge the guy. I feel it's like Bodhiyama still is not in completely embodied in that moment. And as the Zen story goes, this is pretty intense, but this is what happens. It's like you can go read it. It's like the guy cuts off his hand and looks at Bodhiyama kind of strangely hand in hand and looks at Bodhiyama and it's like, Bodhiyama, what did he say? He says something like, I'm loyal to you. It was like a sign of intense sign, an extreme sign of loyalty. And he says, Bodhiyama, please, you gotta help me. Bodhiyama eventually grants this guy an audience. Bodhiyama tells the guy, what is it? And the guy says, again, please, he says, Bodhiyama, my mind's restless. I'm just saying it to kind of recap properly. Um, and he says, Bodhiyama, please pacify my mind. And Bodhiyama looks at this guy and he says, and the guy's kind of really troubled, and he says, bring your mind in front of me and I'll pacify it. The guy thinks about it and sees he can't find his mind. Like literally, the mind is not like a lamp he can kind of bring in front of Bodhiyama and be like, yo, this is my mind, pacified. And the guy looks at Bodhiyama and he says, I can't find it. And Bodhiyama looks at him and says, there, your mind is pacified. And the guy suddenly it clicks. He realizes that the suffering was self generated. Anyways, guys, I guess I'll end the talk here. And I simply want to say care for life because the unknown is alive within it too. That's the thing. It's as if it's like nobody is just the impressions you get of them ever. And if you care for life, pretty much the sages would say it comes down to two things. You either trust life or distrust it. If you trust the moment, it opens, it advances. If you distrust it, it doesn't. Okay, so Idris, I'm reading your comments right now. Just hold on. Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I also know that every person's in their private room with their cosmos. There's some things that the coolest thing I remember hearing from Osho was he kind of referred to the ego to a kind of snow in the melting sun, you know. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. It's incredibly early, so um, I'll catch you in the next one. Much blessings and namaste.